Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long. All right, Ty, I'm going to take this introduction right now because, I don't know, I grew up a UCLA fan. I actively want to see UCLA football, the LA schools, do well, even if they have turned their back on West Coast football and have decided to do everything they can to throw this wonderful region of college football into the dumpster. What an introduction for David Woods. What an introduction. David Woods from the podcast of Champions and Bruin Report Online. How are you today?
I'm good. And it was quite an intro. And I'm right there with you. I think it's a not great move at all for college football, but money plays, man.
Money plays. Okay, so we are talking UCLA as a current 8-ish win program. They won 9 regular season games this past year, and an exciting, explosive offense. And I suppose we can talk about Chip Kelly's defensive history, but we'll stick with the positive here. What is it that has gotten UCLA to this point where they are a good to very good team with what appears to be a ceiling under Chip Kelly?
It's pretty much exactly what you said. The offense, I mean, I'm pretty convinced that between you, me, Ty, and about 8 of our friends, he could craft a pretty good offense, our man Chip. And it's gotten to a point where I think even with Dorian Thompson-Robinson leaving, even with Zach Charbonnet leaving, the system is now in place where you can probably churn out a top 20, top 15 offense pretty much no matter who he runs out there. And it's gotten to that level. The reason it's got a ceiling is because the defense has not been figured out at all. You started with Jerry Azzinaro the first 2 years where it was pretty much just Azzinaro's defense. Then they brought in Brian Norwood from Navy to kind of layer in some 4-2-5. That didn't work. And then they brought in Bill McGovern last year, who brought in some NFL concepts that also didn't work. The defense has been pretty much stuck between 80th to 110th in each of his 5 years. And so, things have not been worked out on that end. Now they're going to try out Danton Lynn, who was a Ravens assistant who's coming in and, whatever you can assess from spring. I mean, it looks like he's got a good head on his shoulders. He's saying the right things, but who knows until you actually watch the thing out there, whether it's going to do what needs to be done, which is get into top 50 territory.
So UCLA in the last decade has fielded good defenses. This is not a place that has been unable to find NFL level talent. I mean, you go back to Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks, Miles Jack, like big time players, NFL caliber players anchoring really good top 30, top 15 type defenses. What is it about the Chip Kelly era? I guess from a talent perspective, if it's a recruiting thing, if it's a development thing, if that's what's holding them back, which it's pretty clear it is there any hope on the horizon from a talent perspective that things may change as UCLA heads to a new conference?
There's a little bit. The NIL situation is kind of the game changer in a few different respects. So initially, Chip Kelly's first few years, high school recruiting was, I won't say deprioritized, but it was the situation where they weren't targeting top tier prospects. They weren't targeting the classic guys that, I'm going to be shouting this, like a crazy person, but UCLA can recruit. It can recruit at a top 15 level, and it has done it historically. Chip Kelly didn't approach it that way. He wanted to kind of target his guys. He was looking for, 3 stars with length and, the measurables and all that idea. It didn't work the first couple of years. They brought in a lot of guys who have since essentially transferred out. Then they were early on the learning curve with the transfer portal. They started to attack that really well, but now with NIL, that's getting more competitive. UCLA has some NIL backing. They were able to land Dante Moore, which, let me tell you, had something to do with NIL.
Sure.
But there's going to be a ceiling to that until it's sort of, there's a cart before the horse situation. They need to win at a higher level than 9-3 to really open up the wallets of a lot of UCLA's boosters to support NIL. I think at this stage, I won't say it's capped out. I think there is still room if the defensive scheme can get figured out, because there's talent in the program. It's not, it's not the most talented UCLA team in history, but there is talent in the program. Schedule's pretty weak this year. But they need to put together probably 1 or 2 really, really good seasons before they can start getting the support they need to actually attack recruiting the way that needs to happen. But Chip is starting to get a handle on, I actually need to get talent in the program. It can't just be my measurable and, mad scientist ideas.
Right.
So we will see. But yeah, they need to win some more on the field.
My question is actually for both of you, Dan, an Oregon alum, and David, obviously a notable guru in all things UCLA football. I'm curious about the parallels between what we saw from Chip at Oregon and now what we're seeing from him at UCLA. Different starting points, right? He stepped in at Oregon. That was instantly a double-digit win team. At UCLA, it's been a slower build. It's taken a while, like 3 years to implement the offense. But are there parallels with how he is building this thing now at UCLA that mirror what he did at Oregon, maybe outside of hiring some of his friends from his previous regime, that can maybe give us some tell as to when it might get to that 10-win level?
My sense of it, and Dan, you can jump in whenever,
sure.
But my sense of it is at Oregon, Chip inherited a program that was already firing on all cylinders or pretty close to it. I mean, Mike Bellotti did a great job there, and the guy, name's escaping me, the guy before Bellotti did a great job.
Rich Brooks, yeah.
Yeah, Rich Brooks, building the program. And Chip Kelly was able then to learn as the offensive coordinator for 2 years. He was able to get familiarity with the recruiting apparatus at Oregon, all of the things that were already in place. None of those program things had to change when Chip Kelly then took over the head coaching job. At UCLA, he was starting at basically the studs because Jim Mora had more or less cratered over the last couple of years at UCLA. It was entirely new support staff, entirely new recruiting apparatus, entirely new coaching staff. He had to make all those decisions for himself. He wasn't inheriting a defensive coordinator. And I think Chip Kelly is a fantastic offensive coordinator. Absolutely a studly offensive coordinator. And I think you could throw him into a triple option and he'd be great. I think you could throw him into a West Coast system that's pure traditional NFL stuff and he'd be great. I think he knows offense backwards and forwards. The rest of the program stuff, I think he's been learning as he's gone, but I think at Oregon, and this is where you can jump in, but I think there was a lot of that stuff was already in place for him to just kind of inherit.
Yeah, the other thing with the Oregon thing is that was his first big shot, right? That's when he has his hunger. That's when they're recruiting nationally because you have to at Oregon. And I think you do have to do at UCLA because UCLA is a big enough brand that I think it resonates with people. And UCLA has had success, recruiting nationally going into Texas. But I think there's also this perception, which I don't think is true with UCLA, where like you can just go into your backyard. You just recruit a Pac-12 champion in Southern California. I don't think you can. I don't think you can find linemen in Southern California like you can when you recruit nationally or even more regionally, right? And you couple that with, I think, Chip Kelly, not really working out in the NFL, taking a year off to broadcast. And I just don't know I don't think it's an energy thing. I think Chip Kelly really wants to win a ton of games. It's just where college football is now, you have to build a recruiting machine. You have to build out a huge staff, which costs money, more money in LA to have, you can't just pay a recruiting staff. You can't pay everybody $50K like you can perhaps in other parts of the country. And so you have to say, if we want to win 10 games a year, we have to recruit aggressively in Texas. We have to recruit aggressively in the Midwest, in Georgia, in Florida, whatever, because UCLA is a big enough brand. You either do or you don't. And I just haven't seen it from UCLA with that type of aggression to build out a deep defensive line, to build out, how do you find the next Tack McKinley? If you ask Chip Kelly, it's maybe somebody will work out at Bowling Green or North Texas or Pennsylvania. Whereas when he's with Oregon, he's going to Hawaii and finding DeForest Buckner and he's finding Eric Armstead in Northern California. From the outside, I don't see the type of aggression needed to fully take advantage of how big of a name UCLA is.
Yeah, and I think that's nail on the head for the most part. I think, and this is where the NIL piece comes in, because I think he was, there was sort of a symbiotic thing going on with Dante Moore. I think he was excited by the idea that they were in the running, and he then got energized by that idea that, we have the money to play with this. Okay, we can work on this. But I think for him to get to the point where he's going to be able to do that with 4 or 5 national recruitments a year, he's got to win more because the pocketbooks have to open. But I think that gave him a little bit of proof of concept for what is possible at UCLA. Right. You can land guys like this, but you have to play the game that everyone else is playing.
Yeah, there is something about like you're either in or you're out, right? That this is the dollar amount that it will take. And we heard stories about this with Urban Meyer and USC, where it's just like, this is my expectation for what a training table looks like. This is when a recruit from Missouri visits UCLA, and they're also visiting Texas and Georgia and Oregon and Ohio State, and they come to UCLA and it's completely less in every regard. What are we doing? Why are we spending any money on football if we're not going to spend enough money on football?
Well, training table is one area where Chip Kelly has not skimped.
Good.
They've got the filet mignon. There was a whole. I recommend going into it at some point. The LA Times expose on what they were serving at the training table dinners is pretty fantastic.
How much of it is that UCLA and obviously USC as well? They're not in college town. They are competing with places, and I'm not even talking about Georgia or Ohio State or something like that, but they are in an expensive part of the country, and there is not a college culture in the way that there is in Knoxville, in Eugene, Oregon, and Columbus. Does that play a role in limiting what the UCLA fan base is willing to do? If they are more interested in the Lakers, the Dodgers, whatever, is that playing a major role in UCLA's ceiling right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different factors. So from that angle, from the booster and fan angle, UCLA has billion-dollar donors, obviously. They just donate to build buildings on campus, build the academic buildings. But they're not that interested in athletics for the most part. What you have is Casey Wasserman, who's, he's worth a couple $100 million. But you've got people at a lot of these schools that are in college towns who have billionaire boosters who, oh yeah, I'm all in on Kansas athletics or Oklahoma State athletics. And so you've got a little bit of that element. You've got a lot of these guys, yes, they are more invested in Lakers. They're more invested in the Kings or the Rams or whatever. And so you've got a lot of that. But I would say that from a recruiting angle with attracting kids to come to UCLA, I think it's 50-50 whether they're really interested in being in a big city where they can do all this different stuff, or they really like this game day atmosphere in Tennessee or whatever it is, where it's like, oh yeah, there's 100,000 people at every single game. And so it kind of just depends on the kid. I would say the biggest factors that actually limit UCLA is probably the Rose Bowl. Being 25 miles from campus, I think that's a big deal. I think it does limit the creation of future boosters when you've got students who, they've got to make a trek to get to games. There's Reuter buses, but as you know, Dan, hanging out in LA on a Saturday afternoon and trying to get to the Rose Bowl is not anyone's idea of a good time.
No.
So there's a lot of factors in play that probably limit UCLA, and there's stuff to overcome, but these aren't insurmountable obstacles. I mean, being in LA, being in this market, and having access, you probably can't build a national title contender just from Southern California. Even USC can't, but you can produce really good teams and then sprinkle in some national recruiting when you're really good, and you can do it. But there's lots of obstacles to overcome, even at UCLA.
All of this stuff is like very smart. It's also on the macro level, but back to the defense for a second. You mentioned Dan Lin for a hot minute. We joke on this show all the time about half teams that have really good offenses, really bad defenses, or vice versa, right? Iowa.
You joke about the Pac-12, you mean?
Yeah, some of the Pac-12, but we joke about Iowa. I mean, it's
we're fair.
It's about as fair as we can be here. I have been trying to understand from published reports what Danton Lin is going to do differently on defense. Now, he in and of himself is a pretty big departure from what Chip has done typically as defensive coordinator, right? This is a 33-year-old guy, no previous experience as a coordinator, but very much seen as a rising star. I can't ask you in mid-May how he's going to fix the defense, but I can't ask you what he's going to do differently than his predecessors that might produce a different result. The best that I've been able to find is that he prefers versatility, and the description I saw sounded a lot like Total Football and Ted Lasso. So I'm hoping maybe you can clarify where things are going with Danton Lin.
So as you know, Chip Kelly is not super forthcoming about, certain things about the program, basically everything. But Dan Lin, I was able to talk to him a couple of times. I don't think it's going to be a huge departure formationally. I think they're still going to run mostly a 4-2-5, but that's pretty much all of college football these days. You're running some form of either a 3-3-5 or a 4-2-5 nickel. almost all the time. What I noticed this spring was they're probably a little bit more aggressive with their nickels than they were last year. Last year, it was a lot more trying to play coverage. Nickels were spending a lot of time in the backfield. And now it's hard to gauge. Some of that is spring. Some of that is just, they know the offensive play call, so they can just get there really quickly. But there was a sense that even the deep safeties were getting upfield super quickly. Now, whether that actually turns out a good defense is anyone's guess. It looks a little bit more aggressive. Now, that being said, the personnel hasn't really changed much. They added a lot of guys on the offensive end. J. Michael Sturdivant at wide receiver is going to be a stud, but on defense, it's more or less the same guys. I mean, Darius Muasau is still going to be the middle linebacker. He was the transfer in from Hawaii last year. The defensive line is going to be more or less the same. The Murphy twins who transferred in last year are going to be two of the guys in the rotation at defensive end. Leatu Latu is the best player on the defense. He's going to be at the other side. So it is going to be very dependent on the scheme improving because player development will only take care of so much. But if the scheme improves, I mean, how many times have we all watched in college football, new coach inherits same guys and suddenly they look a lot better. You mentioned Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks earlier. That was what happened when Lou Spanos and Jim Mora came in. They suddenly looked like a good defense. So D'Anton Lynn, he's saying the right stuff. He's saying, we're going to be multiple. I don't want to design a scheme before I see the guys in spring. He saw the guys in spring. Looks like they're going to run much the same thing because that's what they were familiar with. And a lot of it's going to come down to play calls. And frankly, he hasn't called plays before. So we don't really have a great indication yet what it's going to look like.
I almost, and I'm putting words in your mouth, I almost hear, the defense should improve. But also, new quarterback, whoever that is, new starting quarterback, new receivers, new running back that will be leaned on. Are you worried about the offense in as much as one can be worried about the offense with Chip Kelly, that they're winning games because of the offense these past couple of years, and now they might be winning games because of defensive experience and being able to scratch out points when need be on offense, but it's not necessarily a strength because of all that is new?
Yeah, so looking at the offense, I would say the main question mark for me is probably, weirdly, quarterback, not weirdly. Looking at the receiver core, J. Michael Sturdivant looks, anybody can catch 65 balls in that Cal offense last year. Probably pretty good.
He's definitely good. Definitely good.
Definitely good. He's a stud. Combination of size and speed UCLA hasn't had, I don't know. When Jordan Lasley had his head screwed on straight, and then before that, J.J. Stokes. It's otherworldly. But that's also a reflection of what UCLA's had at wide receiver. And then Kyle Ford, the transfer in from USC, he's going to be really good. I think he's finally healthy. He had such a tough time with injuries at USC. So those two guys added to a group that includes Cam Brown, redshirt freshman Braden Pegan. They're going to be really good at receiver. It's going to be a question of who's delivering the ball. Right now, Ethan Garbers, who is the holdover, he looks like the likely starter at this point just because he was the most consistent in the spring. But 17-year-old Dante Moore, who knows how much progress he's going to make over the summer.
Right.
He was doing stuff this spring, and it's like, wow, his feel for the game is beyond, any freshman you could ever expect. But there's some stuff where, he's not a huge cannon-armed guy, and he's trying to do like wrist flicks and just kind of toss the ball. And on intermediate throws, you cannot do that. Just safeties, even UCLA safeties, crashing down on that ball really quickly. So there's still some stuff he has to pick up about the speed of the game and like literally the speed of the players he's throwing against. But there's a ton of upside there because his feel is truly incredible. And then offensive line, they're going to work something out. They've got a couple of transfers coming in. Colorado's Jake Wiley, Old Dominion left tackle Kadir Kunta, along with some holdovers. They should be able to put that together. I'd say the offense should be fine. I think it's going to be top 20-ish.
Okay.
TJ Harden coming in at running back will also be pretty good and taking over for Zach Charbonnet. But they should be fine. I think the question is, can the defense get to top 60? If the defense can get to top 60, it can make up for, dropping from a top 5 to a top 20 offense.
Do people within the program, when looking forward to joining the Big Ten officially and playing a Big Ten schedule, is there concern? This is you build a program based on who you're going to play somewhat, right? That, you're going to focus on this type of offensive lineman, this type of defensive lineman, this type of quarterback. It's all for your internal vision of the program, but also like you build based on, your schedule. Do you see anything changing? Do you see a recruiting strategy change? Do you see a build, an ideal build in a recruit changing? How is this going to go 2, 3, 4 years down the line?
That's a great question. So as of yet, I think the main thing is that they have started to recruit a little bit more regionally for that area. I wouldn't say the recruit type has changed, but they've started to look more at guys in that area. I mean, Dante Moore.
Sure.
I don't know if they would have necessarily targeted him, and not because they didn't want him, but because they wouldn't have thought they could get him. But I think part of the attraction, it was probably lower down the list, but part of the attraction of going to UCLA was the fact that, well, I'm from Michigan, so this will be okay. I think there's other guys that they're targeting, especially offensive line. I think that's the way they're probably going to approach it, is we can target a lot of those Midwestern offensive linemen in a way that we weren't able to before.
Right.
I think that's what Chip Kelly's kind of thinking. And then I don't know from a system standpoint how much they will change. I think for a lot of those Big Ten schools, I think USC and UCLA coming in with, particularly USC, coming in with that sort of offensive style will be a big shift for some of those schools.
Sure.
They have enough trouble dealing with Ohio State and the mild variations on offense that they do. It's going to be really interesting to see how, say, Michigan and Jim Harbaugh approaches handling USC in particular, but even UCLA with its multiple kind of varied pro-style offense.
David, I'll get you out of here on this. The UCLA schedule this year seems like it's set up for 10 wins.
Mm-hmm.
They're at both Utah and USC, but no Oregon, no Washington. The non-conference slate seems extremely workable. However, new quarterback, new running, like a lot of new that we just discussed here over the last few minutes. Vegas right now has them at an over-under of 8.5. We have not done our over-under show yet. We won't for a couple weeks. Just wondering, upon hearing that number, how you feel about 8.5.
It's a good number. That's what I would say. I think 9 would probably be my guess because just looking at it, San Diego State on the road, I think if this was 3 years ago, Chip Kelly, I'd be like, I don't know about that one. Mm-hmm. But as it is, the talent in the program is enough that I think they should be able to handle that. Coastal at home is obviously better than Coastal on the road, and then NC Central's FCS. I would say, I would put it at 9-3, but I would probably avoid that number. I would say if you can get it at, I don't know if you're going to get it any lower than that. But yeah, I think 9 wins. I think 9-3 is probably what I'm thinking going into the summer.
You can find him on Twitter, David Woods. He's the co-host of the BROcast for Bruin Report Online, as well as the Podcast of Champions, a year-round Pac-12 podcast. David, thanks so much for coming on here and sharing some of your wisdom.
Yeah, thanks, fellas. Enjoyed it.